Hello all, welcome to the solo cast of Firecode Tech. In these episodes, it's just going to be me, your host, Gus Gagliardi. There's going to be a range of topics, but I'm going to talk about specific technologies, installation standards, codes and how they work, as well as some other interesting topics that don't neatly fit inside of the context of a normal interview. Hello all, welcome to episode 56 of Firecode Tech. Today we have a very special episode with an interview with my wife, Kaelynn Gagliardi. In this episode, we're talking with Kaelynn about her career in marketing and communications. We speak about why it's important to cultivate a personal brand as a professional living in the digital age. Kaelynn started her career in journalism and has over 200 articles during her time as a journalist, so she gives her tips on professional writings and how you can weave a better narrative and story into your next fire and life safety project. This episode is really special to me. Kaelynn has been a part of the podcast since its very beginning, and she has been such a big help along the way. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and follow us on social media. Oh, and if you do me a huge favor, go and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Let's get into the show. Well, Kaelynn, welcome to the Firecode Tech podcast. Thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, I always like to get these things started with, telling the listeners a bit about your background and your professional career. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to think of myself as a former journalist turned communications professional. I have experience working for large corporations, for a small PR and marketing firm, and I've worked in internal communication, so employer to employee communications. I've done client communications. I've been a part of brand awareness campaigns. I've done a lot of blog writing, social media. I've been a part of digital advertising projects, media pitching, community giving, planning events. I've kind of worn a lot of hats, in addition to, having a previous career as a journalist.
That's very interesting. Good to hear about some of the different roles that you've had so far. Sometimes I like to dive into, schooling. You touched on that journalism piece, and so I'd like to hear a little bit more about your education and how those first couple roles shaped your career.
Yeah, so I went to Oklahoma State University, and I was a student in their journalism and strategic communications school. I my path was print journalism. I really enjoyed writing growing up, and took college as an opportunity to dive into that a little more. Yes, I was a student at the journalism school, but honestly, I feel like a lot of my education came from working for the student newspaper, where I wrote more than 200 articles, I think, by the time I graduated. I really enjoyed it, and that was kind of my outlet to really finesse my writing and just, be a sponge and soak up, all the knowledge that my peers had to offer, our advisors had to offer, and, our professors too. So it was a really good learning lab for me. And then while I was in school, I had 4 internships that, allowed me to learn in the real world. So it was a really, I felt like once I left school, I knew what I was getting into.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite, facts, or one of your most impressive facts is that you had an internship all 4 years of your college experience. And not only did you have an internship all 4 summers, but you also were frequently writing for the newspaper, on a weekly basis for the school newspaper. Speak a little bit more about those internship experiences and how those help set you up for your professional career.
Sure. So I think, having experience, like I said, it really allowed me to see, okay, this is the field that you're getting in, and this is what you're going to do on a daily basis. I got to talk to other professionals who had been in the field for decades and, go out to lunch with them and pick their brains, pick the brains of my managers, talk to them candidly about, hey, should I continue doing this? What have you enjoyed about your career? What are the really cool things that you've gotten to do? What opportunities are there in the field? So I think I would highly recommend at least having one internship because, it really opens your eyes to what you're getting yourself into and also what opportunities there are within your field.
Yeah, that's great advice. I always try to encourage people to get a sense of what career they're looking to go into, and you can't really ever know what a job is going to be like until you actually get in there, work with your manager, see what the process and flow for the job role is, and really just kind of get a sense for what that day-to-day looks like, because you can have an idea of what a job might be, and in reality it might be something completely different. So touching on that journalism piece a bit more, we're doing an interview right now, but how was your experience with interviewing people? I know you've told me some stories previously about how it could sometimes be challenging, or it seems like you had a wide variety of interview experiences during your time as a journalist.
For sure. I've conducted a lot of interviews and been a part of a lot of interviews. And I think doing your research and knowing, your subject, first of all, is key. And, I think that just being a human is really important too, because that's when you're going to get people to, open up to you. When you say, hey, here's some commonalities we have, or here's, something that we both share interest in, to kind of open the door a little bit to get them to feel comfortable with you, and, to share their story. Because that's one thing I really loved about journalism is it's storytelling. And, you have to get people to open up to you so that you can share their story. And the more comfortable they are with you, the better stories they're going to share with you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that people need to feel some sense of rapport, and there has to be some sort of personal chemistry when you are having an interview, or else it kind of just feels flat, or like there isn't any sort of chemistry in what's happening in the conversation. So I can really appreciate that point of trying to level with somebody and provide a point of commonality between two parties. That's a great, I like that. So trying to draw a through line, into, during college, well, I was going to move on till after college, but I think there's more meat on the bone for like in college, like what kind of professional societies and things were you a part of that, helped form you and like start to build your rapport and network during that time?
Yeah, so I was a part of a couple of professional organizations or student organizations, Society of Professional Journalists, SPJ, and then also PRSSA, which is the student version of Public Relations Society of America. I spent a lot of my time working for the student newspaper. Otherwise, I probably would have been even more involved. But those, I think, were the main groups that, I was a part of that really allowed me to grow as an individual. And I think that just being a part of those groups, and you're going to find people who are interested in the same thing as you are. So, it's easy to brainstorm, bounce ideas off each other, think about things in a different way. And then also, a lot of times those groups have an advisor or are led by a professor, which can be really great to, have someone that you can, talk to about your ideas or ask questions about. And that's just someone else that you have, at your disposal as, someone who can give you guidance as a student, someone that, you can come back to later in your career. So I would definitely recommend, as a student, for any students who are listening, take advantage of those groups because they only get harder to join as you get older and more expensive.
Yeah, that's a good point. Get involved while it's free and while people are trying to, professionals are trying to break their neck to get students involved. And, I feel like professional societies are always so hungry for people to get involved and start to be a part of the organization.
Well, and I had one thing to add to that. When I say that they get harder to get involved in, life continues to happen, and I feel like you have more time as a student to really make those connections, whereas as an adult, a lot of times those commitments have to happen after hours, and it's a lot more.
Yeah, it's just more labor intensive to try to facilitate these connections. And I mean, it's a lot easier as a student. I mean, like a lot of times people are coming in as speakers and bringing in free food, and like they're really doing everything they can to try to make it easy for you to be involved as a professional. So, I mean, and I was not the best about it when I was in school. I went to a couple, SFPEs and Society of Safety Engineers, ASSE at the time. I think they're ASSP now. But yeah, the message is, when you're in school, if you're in school, do everything you can to really capitalize on the resources that higher education has to give, because I know I've heard other people say it before, they wish they would have taken advantage of some of the more laboratory or whatever facilities that your college might have at their disposal. So lean into professional societies and just the resources that your college has to offer. But, moving forward, people in the journalism industry often talk about marketing as going to the dark side. And today I really wanted to talk to you because I think that in the digital age that we live in, it is impossible to disassociate being a professional and having a personal brand, and being a professional and managing your personal image. So moving forward into your first foray into a different field out of college, like just speak to me broadly about this transition from journalism major to marketing professional and kind of what that means to be a marketing professional.
Well, I'll do my best to answer that question, and I can only speak from my experience. But newsrooms are shrinking. I think most people are pretty aware of that. We have fewer people who are expected to stay up to date on your local community news, what's happening in your state, and then what's happening in the country overall. So journalists are inundated with a lot of information and are having to sift through a lot of, press releases, updates, everything. So, going from being a journalist to being someone who's sending out those press releases, it helped me have that perspective and a better filter for what busy journalists care about and, what's going to catch their eye and what are they going to be interested in? How can we take what we're doing and make it part of, a larger story? How can we make the journalist job easier and get our message out? So it really helped me to have, that filter as someone who's working in communications and marketing. And then, it also As a journalist, I think you're innately curious. And so, that is such a sought after skill in any industry and in any role. Like, you want someone who is going to be, asking really good questions and getting to the why of, why are we working on this project? Why is this our goal? And so I think that, those things help me to step into the marketing and communications world without necessarily having gotten a degree in that. I think, journalism, marketing, public relations, strategic communications, they're all closely connected. And, making that switch early in my career was a good move for me.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point about curiosity and, learning to really be invested in what you are working in. I think I was talking to one of my coworkers recently, and he said, I think that you're easily amused like I am, and that sort of curiosity has really been a blessing to me in my career. So I think that's a great point. And then, another awesome thing you touched on that to me is a real hallmark of any great professional is the ability to ask good questions. I can always remember back in school, I would be sitting through a webinar or a lecture or a guest speaker, and my professors would always have really great questions. And not just, good questions for, a student, great questions for a professional, like things they were interested in, things that really, they wanted to know and had a true interest in and brought life to the conversation and the topic or the speech. So I think that being able to ask good questions is a really big deal for anyone who's worth their salt at what they do. So I really like those 2 points about what you touched on so far.
Yeah, and another thing that I'll add, I touched on it a little bit earlier, but storytelling, that's what journalists are paid to do essentially. But even as a marketing professional, like the best marketers are storytellers. And if you can humanize your product or, your service in a way that shows how it impacts people's lives and, draw a connection, you're going to be more successful as a marketer than someone who just says, hey, here's our product, you should really try it. Because it goes back to, hey, you're piquing someone's interest with a story. You're showing them how your product or service can be useful in their life. So I think that all of the best, if you think about like even commercials, the commercials that tell a story, like those usually catch my attention more than, just someone pushing a product. So that's also a commonality I see between the two fields.
Yeah, I was just in the process of creating some contract documents for a project I was working on just today. And one of the notes I had from Brandon was, tell this story a little bit more. It's not clear why we have this other structure or this, piece of the puzzle. Why is this here? If somebody looks at this and they're not as acquainted with the project, how are they going to understand this? So they're really in the design process, right? As an engineer, we're constantly writing legal documents. And so that's one other through line or parallel between, your experience in professional writing is I see that, there is so much writing in preparing shop drawings. Not shop drawings, but design documents and specifications. So, yeah. What tips would you have? I know I'm putting you on the spot here. We didn't prep this one, but what tips would you have for people who are looking to buff up a little bit on their writing abilities? I know I've struggled with this recently and you've kind of helped me through a little bit, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think first of all, just say practice. You can't get better at something if you don't put in the reps. That's one of the things that, I was talking about earlier. I was getting a lot of reps at the student newspaper. I would not be the professional that I am today if I hadn't gotten those reps. So I think, first and foremost, practice. And then second of all, there's a ton of free resources on the internet. If your issue is grammar, there's resources that specifically cater to grammar. If you have difficulty with sentence structure, all of those things you can easily find resources for. And I will follow up with Gus and see if he can add some of those links to some of those resources in the show notes, so you have access to those.
Yep, that's a great point. And, one item that we've talked about recently that's helped me is, if you're not sure on how to tell the story or how to really structure what you're trying to communicate, to write a skeleton or an outline of what you're thinking. If you have a technical report in which you are trying to communicate a message, what are the salient points that you're trying to convey? And after you write those 4 bullet points, how do you weave that narrative together? So that's something that you offered to me when, early in my new role as how to, kind of buff up on your writing ability is kind of sketch it out or flow chart it. That's something you do in school, these bubble diagrams and different spider charts and stuff. But, when you get to be an adult, you forget all that stuff and you're just like, man, I'm having trouble writing this. What do I do? So for me, that was a helpful little reminder on writing technique.
Yeah, and everyone has their own process. I think my process is kind of to do an initial brain dump and get everything from my brain out on paper. And then oftentimes, here's, the conclusion that I want to make. Okay, here's the points that support that. And I kind of work backwards. Because for me, sometimes the introduction is the hard part. I know all the facts. I just have to figure out, okay, how do I want to present this and set it up? So I think, there's a lot of different, options for just brainstorming and getting your ideas out on paper and kind of organizing them, like you were referring to the different charts and, bubble diagrams and things. But, everyone has their own process. So I would just encourage you to find what works for you. And then, to hone in on that and refine that.
That's a good point. So moving on, some of the things that we hinted on, let's talk a little bit about what it means for somebody to have a personal brand or for a company to be thinking about their image or social persona. What do you see as, what does that mean in today's age to you?
I think that's kind of a loaded question. A personal brand is huge. You need to definitely have, an updated LinkedIn. If you have a personal website, keep your personal website updated. Make sure it's user-friendly, easy for managers and recruiters to use and find the information that they need. Even more so than just like your online presence, I would say be kind, treat your coworkers, your managers, and your clients, with respect. I think that it's a small world. And so, making sure that you treat everyone and have just outside of your digital presence, just a good reputation in general. Honestly, as a manager, like that is way more important to me, than whether or not you have a LinkedIn profile. Because I want to recruit those people who are, great to work with and are hungry, humble, and smart to be on my team, instead of someone who's just great at social media. And then, from a company perspective, having a great customer experience Like I said, word of mouth, even for companies. There's Glassdoor, there's so many review sites, Trust Radius, G2, where people can go and rate you for your customer experience. And, people really pay attention to those. And so I would say definitely be keying in on what is your customer journey, even before, they become a customer. Like, what does that sales journey look like for them? And then, okay, now they're a customer. What does that customer journey look like for them? Are they getting the support that they need? Where could you, enhance that journey for them? So I don't know if that answers your question. I think I veered off a little bit there, but you did, speak to personal brand and company brand. So I would say, those are my tips.
Yeah, well, as all my questions, it was ambiguous and extremely broad, so I think you did just fine there. No, I think that the one point that really struck true to me, and it was a bit, well, I guess it is personal brand, but we work in Oklahoma City, the greater area of Oklahoma City, and I can't count how many times that our rapport with other industry professionals or knowing somebody and being able to have a good reputation has paid dividends in our career. I mean, we've both been working for 5 to 6 years, and I can't count how many times it's been a boon to us to have a good name in the community and to have coworkers that would vouch for the quality and the standing of your work and your attitude and your disposition. So I think that you would really be doing yourself a disservice to not think about that, because, as people move on and you realize as you get to work for a while, people will move on. You will work with quite a few people, even people who you would never imagine would be, a benefit or a proponent to your career or whatever your goal is. They'll pop up. You'll be surprised. Treat people good. Try to be a good steward, hard worker, and be involved and be kind. And it just always seems to amaze me, the people who will come out of the blue and, be a boon to your career. But, we talked a little bit about professional and social image, but something we talk about frequently together that I wanted to pick your brain a little bit more on was your journey from individual to individual contributor to a manager, and kind of how you've seen that transition and your growing pains you don't have to speak specifically to anything, but how the struggles and the learning curves of going from somebody who focuses on doing a task and providing a product into, the different challenges of management.
Yeah. I would say, as an individual contributor, I think sometimes you can be like, well, I'm doing all of this work over here. Like, what does my manager have to do? And, as someone who is in a leadership role now, I can tell you there's a lot of work to do. But being in a leadership role is fun. I think that there are definitely some growing pains and just like a learning curve, as with any new role. If you have a company where you are, bringing up individual contributors into leadership, I would definitely encourage you to think about the training for those new leaders, because I would say that anything that I could get my hands on, I was trying to read and look into, because I wanted to be, a good leader. I think, oftentimes there are people who are put into leadership roles that, maybe that's not the best fit for them, or maybe they just want to be individual contributors. And so to that end, I would say, make sure, think about the growth paths at your company. And, it may not always be leadership for everyone. And so think about how you can maybe offer a growth path that, isn't leadership oriented, and maybe offers, growth, but, as an individual contributor. Because I do think, that it is hard and it's a unique position and it's not for everyone. But, one of the biggest things that I've taken away just in my, fairly short time as a leader is make sure that you're being human. Be a human first and a manager second. I think that thinking about how, you can support your employees, and I've heard people say it as, think about how you're there to serve, your employees. It's my job to coach them. It's my job to make sure that they're challenged and that they're growing, but also that they're supported and that they know that I'm there for them and that I'm going to help them, through the challenges. And yes, it might be hard, but they're going to be a better employee on the other side of, this project, or, this report that they're trying to master, or whatever it may be. So does that answer your question?
Of course. I think that, I feel like I don't have much to add to that conversation. I like what you said. I've had different struggles in my small forays I've had into trying to lead others or manage others or be a mentor. I think it's something that is exceedingly difficult, and not everybody is geared for it. The one piece of advice I always like to give young professionals reaching out to me, either through LinkedIn or through personal connection, is to really try to find who is well suited for mentorship or for teaching, because you will stumble upon people who really shine at it, and you need to lean into the people in your community who, first of all, you can mesh with on a personal level, and then second of all, they have the technical proclivity for mentoring and providing the technical knowledge for how to grow you as a professional. So that's not really, it's a little bit more management and professional development, but I don't think even I've had as much management experience as that you've been in your new role for a little while. So it's been cool to hear you go through your journey. But moving on to some professional development topics, even though these all have kind of been professional development topics, but what piece of advice would you give yourself if you were starting out again as a professional? What did you have any big eureka moments in the first couple years of working, or what kind of takeaways can you offer the Fire Code Tech listeners?
Well, my piece of advice to myself would be, and I think I did a fairly okay job at this, but take advantage of all the opportunities that come your way. As a young professional, I think you have to learn the foundational basics at your job, right? And as you learn those basics, then you get to take advantage and be a part of, other projects, and, learn new skills and grow from those. And, sometimes things fall on your plate that aren't necessarily in your job description. And when those opportunities come, I really encourage you to look at them as an opportunity versus as something you have to do. Because I think I have grown so much over my career just because I've taken advantage of some of those opportunities and, difficult projects and, things like that. And I'm better for it. So I would say, learn as much as you can, because you never know where your career is going to go. You never know who you're going to meet working on that project, and what opportunities they may have for you down the line. And you never know like what skill you might learn that, hey, maybe you're able to be an even better asset to the team because you learned this one, Excel shortcut or whatever it might be. So that would be my advice is take advantage of all the opportunities that come your way, and have a positive attitude.
Yeah, that attitude thing is so big, and we talk about that. We both had experiences with, individuals in our career who maybe don't have the best attitude, or a learning attitude or a positive teamwork attitude, and it can cause such friction in a team or, in a business transaction. It can be something that really takes the wind out of everybody's sails. So that one is huge. And yeah, I think that's a huge piece of advice. Don't be afraid to say yes to something, that somebody is asking you to do that you don't know how to do. It's okay to not understand it completely and to say yes and to figure it out along the way. And in fact, once you get to a certain point in your career, you just always be comfortable in figuring it out. And that's kind of what the true mastery looks like, being comfortable enough to say, I may not know everything that I need to get this done, but I know that I could figure it out. So don't be afraid to really go out on a limb. And, obviously you don't want to put yourself or your organization in a spot where you are acting completely out of your competence range. But as long as everybody is aware of, your ability to perform and the expectations, I think there are so many profound opportunities to grow as a professional and to bring value to an organization by trying new things. My next question on professional development is centered around, resources. What kind of resources do you like to use to keep yourself in touch with what's going on in the industry? I understand that we're not explicitly in the same industries, but I do know that you consume a lot of different types of, content to help you shape you as a business professional. So I'd love to hear about that.
So I would say, daily I get email newsletters that are catered to my industry with quick articles on, hey, 4 things you can be doing here, or, is your organization prepared for this, or have you thought about this? That just, make me think outside of my daily to-do list, which is always good. And then, I've got some weekly newsletters. I have an organization that I'm a part of. They send out a monthly magazine. And then one thing that I would say that, spans industries is just make sure you know what's going on in the news. No brand ever wants to come off as insensitive or tone deaf. And also, not only for PR reasons, but also for, marketing opportunities. If you see that there's been a shift, in the economy, or a shift, in the ways that people are thinking about things, maybe that sets you up for an opportunity, or you have a great message or angle where, you can go after sales in a different way. So, I just think, read the news, listen to the news, whatever makes sense for you, but, know what's happening in the world.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I can be pretty bad about keeping my head in a hole sometimes as far as what's going on with news or just the general news, but it is a great idea for, whatever industry you're in to be aware of what kind of, trends are happening as far as what technology is trending, what legislation is coming out, how's that going to impact your role, not just what is the state of the industry now, but where is the, whatever metaphor you want to use, hockey puck, soccer ball, baseball, where is the thing that you're chasing, where's that going, so that you can be on top of it as a professional, which I think is so very important. I can think, another way to extrapolate that message to fire and life safety is just, or, design professionals in specific is, what kind of buildings are trending, what economy is popping. Oh, tech is down, so what's important now, or are we still concerned about, data centers, or, what's different in X or Y or type of building. So, just kind of thinking about that and being appraised of what's happening in the community is a big deal. Speaking of trends, I wanted to pick your brain for our last question. Is what do you see as a trend in the industry right now for, you as a professional? I know you keep pretty appraised of what's happening and have some ideas about that. Love to hear.
Sure. I think one thing that I've been thinking about a lot is, just the evolution of marketing and how, TV, that used to be the main way that brands got their message across and, promoted themselves. And then we've seen that shift, over the last couple decades to the internet and, then to social media. And, I'm thinking, okay, where is this going in the future? And there's been a lot of talk about the metaverse and how, that's going to be a multi-billion-dollar industry, in the next decade. And, how can you position your brand for the metaverse? And what are some things to think about? And here's what other brands have done. And so I think reading those case studies and learning more about the metaverse and technologies like you hinted to is really fascinating, and also me, on the pulse of like what is happening and what can I look forward to and how can I position my team and my organization to think about XYZ, that's going to be coming down the way.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that I haven't thought about the metaverse and how that might, interact with my industry, but I'm sure there's something there with all of the technology and 3D BIM and alternate reality technology there is out there. But
sure you want to say that?
What do you mean?
Just the fact that you haven't thought about it.
I say it all the time. Sometimes people will message me with really interesting recommendations of the things that I say that I don't know about. It's something that's panned out for the better, really. Well, I mean, the metaverse is it seems like a gimmick at this point. It doesn't seem so tangible, but, we were just reading Ready Player One the other day where, they basically have the metaverse and everybody's kind of plugged into that. So it doesn't seem like that's too far away. So obviously I need to start thinking about it. But I think that I lied and that wasn't my last question. And then my last question is, do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, I'm curious. I listen to the podcast, but obviously don't work in your industry. So where do you see are the biggest gaps, or, how can you translate all of this, marketing jargon and speak to someone who works in your industry? What would you say are your three biggest takeaways?
Yeah, I think that for me, fire and life safety does a pretty bad job at marketing. That's kind of the whole reason I got into this podcast thing, was that I just felt unheard as a young professional. And so I think, number one, we could do a better job in trying to reach people and getting more creative on how to reach consumers or people who are in our industry, or top line funnel people into the industry to begin with, because I know that this is a theme in general for all engineering disciplines, but we're starved for new young professionals to come into the industry. I've said frequently that when I graduated from the Oklahoma State Fire Protection and Safety Technology program, it was a class around 40, and maybe only a quarter or a third of those professionals will go into my specific kind of industry, and then within that, maybe half of those, so an eighth of all of those kids even go into something that could be a fire protection engineer. So I don't know, that's all anecdotal, but I would really be happy if people would try to think more about the personal brand and the company brand in order to reach people and let people know about how good of a field it is and how much opportunity there is. I think that's the big one in my mind. And then second of all, personal brand for me has been a huge boost to my just status as a professional. Having Fire Code Tech, having a updated LinkedIn, being somebody who routinely engages people who they don't know in personal life but have reached out to. A topic that we talk about a lot is not being afraid to reach out to somebody in your network and not be a bother, not be insistent or just an annoyance, but having the ability to reach out to somebody and ask to pick their brain about a topic or subject that maybe you're struggling with or interested in. That has been a professional or just kind of personal brand thing that has been an exceedingly huge boon to me. And then I think one more topic of how this relates to everybody. We talk about content a lot and just content production and content development. And, I really didn't know what I was getting into early on, just, what this is or what the role looks like. But at the end of the day, it's a giant marketing exercise or marketing endeavor. I mean, the podcast is a marketing vehicle in itself. So sometimes I get people who will reach out to me and want to, talk to me about creating a podcast or video content. And I, first thing I think about for them is, do they have a personal brand? Are they posting on social media? Or do they have, a couple dozen followers on or connections on LinkedIn or, no other ostensibly social media presence? It's going to be a pretty heavy lift to produce content that anybody is going to see with that kind of just interaction with social media and personal brand. So if you have an interest in releasing content or producing anything, or really any business can benefit from having people in your following or just connections that will be able to see the good things you're doing. Otherwise, you're kind of just operating in a void. So that's 3 things that I just kind of rambled through. But no, I appreciate that. Well, Miss Kaelynn, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I just want to thank you so much for coming on. For the people who don't know, Kaelynn has been a part of the podcast before it was even conceived. So she's been a huge help in everything from the branding to picking the songs to trying to dissuade me from starting the podcast 2 months before we were supposed to get married. And then, me being really mule-headed and just doing it anyways, to much of her consternation. So I really wanted to have Kaelynn on because she has been such an integral part of the podcast for such a long time, and it makes a lot of sense, and she has a lot to give to the listeners. So just wanted to give an on-air thank you. I've been thinking about adding a thank you to you in the conclusion little snippet of the podcast audio, because you've always been just somebody pushing me along and encouraging me to keep going. So big thank you to you, Miss Kaelynn.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And, it was actually a lot more fun than I thought being on the podcast. Gus knows this, but no one else does. I don't like attention. So, this was actually fun. So thank you for pushing me out of my comfort zone. And then one last note, to the listeners, Gus Gus is so passionate about fire code tech and so dedicated. And, he does put a lot of thought and effort into, his guests that he's booking, the topics that he's covering. And, he wants to hear from you. So if you all have ideas, thoughts, you're interested in being on the podcast, please reach out because that means a lot to him.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to share the episode with a friend if you enjoyed it. Don't forget that fire protection and life safety is serious business. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are by no means a professional consultation or a codes and standards interpretation. Be sure to contact a licensed professional if you are getting involved with fire protection and or life safety. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.